What if the greatest mistake we ever made in the study of consciousness was assuming that consciousness behaves like a machine instead of a living field of experience constantly responding to meaning, emotion, expectation, and relationship? I've spent years examining the strange gap between what modern systems measure and what human beings actually feel. And the deeper I look, the more convinced I become that we have been testing for consciousness through the wrong lens entirely. We've treated awareness like a signal trapped inside the brain, isolated from the body, disconnected from emotion, separated from memory, and untouched by belief. But human experience keeps revealing something very different. When people face moments of profound change, the shifts rarely begin with logic alone. They begin with feeling, a realization, a deep emotional recognition, a sudden moment where the body responds before the intellect has fully formed an explanation. That response matters more than most people realize, because consciousness may not simply be something we think. It may be something we participate in through every system of the body at once. For decades, many scientific models attempted to identify consciousness through external behavior. Researchers measured reaction times, electrical activity, speech patterns, and cognitive responses. Useful information came from those studies, but they also created a hidden assumption. The assumption was that consciousness could be reduced to output. If a person answered correctly, responded quickly, or displayed certain neural patterns, awareness was considered present. But that approach misses one essential truth. Consciousness is not only performance, it is inner experience. And inner experience cannot be fully separated from emotional meaning. I find it fascinating that two people can live through the exact same event and emerge with completely different biological outcomes. One person becomes overwhelmed by stress, while another develops resilience and clarity. The external circumstance may be identical, but the interpretation changes the chemistry of the body itself. That tells us something important. Consciousness is not passively observing reality. It is interacting with reality continuously. This changes the way we should think about belief. Most people hear the word belief and imagine positive thinking or blind optimism. But belief is much deeper than mental repetition. Belief is the emotional certainty that instructs the nervous system how to prepare for the future. The body listens to belief as if it were a forecast of reality. When we truly expect danger, the body changes. Hormones shift, muscles tighten, immune responses adapt, even perception narrows. And when we genuinely feel safety, possibility, connection, or purpose, entirely different biological pathways activate. So if consciousness influences biology through emotional meaning, then measuring consciousness only through intellectual tasks becomes incomplete. I believe this is why so many ancient systems of self-understanding focused less on abstract thought and more on states of being. They recognize that human awareness changes according to emotional coherence. When the mind, body, and emotional state become aligned, perception changes dramatically. Intuition sharpens, creativity expands, the sense of separation weakens. People often describe feeling more alive, more connected, and more aware of subtle patterns around them. Modern research is beginning to approach similar conclusions from a different direction. Studies involving stress, meditation, visualization, emotional regulation, and neuroplasticity increasingly suggest that our inner state alters measurable physical processes. The body is not simply reacting to the world outside, it is responding to the story the mind believes about the world. That realization carries enormous implications, because if our methods of testing consciousness ignore emotional depth, relational awareness, and embodied perception, then we may be overlooking the very qualities that make consciousness transformative in the first place. We keep searching for awareness as though it were a static object instead of a dynamic relationship between perception, feeling, memory, biology, and meaning. And perhaps that explains why so many people feel disconnected in modern life. Despite unprecedented technological advancement, we have become experts at measuring information while losing touch with direct experience. We can track brain waves, monitor heart rhythms, and analyze behavior in extraordinary detail. Yet many people still feel emotionally fragmented. They know more data about themselves than ever before, but they feel less connected to themselves internally. I don't think that disconnect is accidental. When human beings are trained to distrust intuition, suppress emotion, and prioritize constant external validation, consciousness becomes narrowed, awareness contracts into survival mode, the body begins functioning as though it is trapped in perpetual uncertainty. Over time, people stop listening to subtle internal signals because they have been conditioned to believe that only measurable external evidence matters. But consciousness may reveal itself most clearly through the very experiences traditional systems struggle to quantify. The feeling of knowing something before evidence appears, the sudden clarity that emerges during silence, the emotional shift that changes physical health, the sense that our relationships influence us at levels deeper than words. These experiences are often dismissed because they resist conventional measurement, yet they remain deeply human, consistent, and profoundly influential in shaping behavior and biology. I think we are entering a period where the definition of intelligence itself will begin to change. Intelligence may not only involve analytical capability, it may also involve emotional regulation, self-awareness, adaptability, empathy, and the capacity to remain internally coherent under pressure. Those qualities affect every aspect of human performance, decision-making, health, and connection. And if that is true, then consciousness cannot be understood by studying the brain in isolation. We have to examine the whole human experience. The body, the emotions, the expectations we carry, the environments we absorb, the stories we repeat internally. Because every one of those elements appears to shape the way awareness expresses itself through us. And once we begin to recognize that consciousness may behave less like a machine and more like a living ecosystem, an entirely different question begins to emerge. Instead of asking whether consciousness exists only inside the brain, we may need to ask how much of our reality is being filtered through the emotional patterns we have unconsciously inherited since childhood, because those inherited patterns may be shaping our perception long before conscious thought ever enters the picture. I think this is one of the most overlooked aspects of human awareness. Most people assume they are seeing reality directly, but in truth, much of what we experience is filtered through emotional conditioning embedded deep within the nervous system. The body remembers experiences long after the conscious mind stops thinking about them. And those memories do not remain passive. They quietly influence posture, breathing, attention, relationships, decisions, and even physical health. That means consciousness is not merely observing life from a distance, it is continuously interpreting life through layers of emotional association. When someone grows up surrounded by unpredictability, the nervous system adapts to expect instability. Even in peaceful environments later in life, the body may continue preparing for danger because it learned to equate uncertainty with survival. Another person raised in emotional safety may respond to the exact same circumstance with curiosity instead of fear. The event itself is not the only factor shaping experience. The internal emotional framework changes perception before conscious reasoning even begins. And this is where I believe many conventional approaches to consciousness fall short. They often focus on cognition while overlooking emotional memories stored throughout the body. But the body is not separate from awareness. It participates in awareness constantly. I've seen this reflected in countless stories of transformation. People often describe major breakthroughs not as intellectual achievements, but as moments when they finally felt something differently. A person may understand logically that they are capable, worthy, or safe, yet their body still reacts as though the opposite were true. Then one meaningful emotional experience changes everything. Suddenly, the nervous system stops resisting the possibility of change. The body accepts a new pattern, and behavior shifts naturally afterward. That process tells us something extraordinary. Belief is not only mental agreement. Belief becomes biological when emotion reinforces it deeply enough. This may explain why emotionally charged experiences shape human behavior so powerfully. The brain prioritizes experiences connected to survival, attachment, and meaning. Emotions act like amplifiers, signaling which moments matter most. Over time, repeated emotional states create familiar internal environments. Eventually, many people become chemically attached to emotional patterns without realizing it. Stress becomes familiar, anxiety becomes expected, self-doubt becomes automatic. And because these patterns feel familiar, the nervous system can mistake them for identity. I think this is why genuine personal change can feel uncomfortable at first. When someone begins adopting healthier emotional states, the body sometimes resists the change because unfamiliar emotions can initially feel unsafe, even when they are beneficial. Peace may feel strange to a nervous system trained for constant vigilance. Confidence may feel unnatural to someone conditioned by years of criticism. The mind wants transformation, but the body keeps recreating old emotional chemistry. So the question becomes, how do we shift consciousness in a lasting way? Not through forced positivity, not through denial, and not through endless intellectual analysis alone. Real transformation often begins when awareness becomes compassionate enough to observe internal patterns without immediately reacting to them. The moment we recognize that thoughts, emotions, and conditioned responses are patterns rather than permanent identity, space begins to open inside the mind. We stop becoming trapped inside automatic reactions. We begin participating consciously in the direction of our inner experience. And that participation matters enormously because the body is always listening. Every thought carries emotional consequences. Every emotional state influences chemistry. Every repeated pattern strengthens neural pathways that shape future perception. In many ways, consciousness behaves like a feedback loop between mind, emotion, biology, and environment. The more often a state is repeated, the more natural it feels. That applies equally to fear and resilience, to hopelessness and purpose, to emotional exhaustion and inner stability. What fascinates me most is that human beings appear capable of intentionally influencing this process. Breathing patterns can calm the nervous system. Focused attention can strengthen neural pathways. Visualization can alter physiological responses. Emotional connection can improve recovery and resilience. Gratitude can shift hormonal balance and perception. None of these effects are imaginary. They represent measurable interactions between inner experience and physical biology. Yet for years, many people dismissed such practices because they did not fit older models of consciousness rooted entirely in mechanical thinking. But consciousness may be far more relational than mechanical. It may emerge through connection rather than isolation. Connection between thoughts and emotions. Connection between body and environment. Connection between expectation and physiology. Connection between human beings themselves. I often think about how strongly emotional states spread through groups without words. One anxious person can affect an entire room. One calm presence can reduce tension instantly. Human beings constantly influence one another through subtle signals beneath conscious awareness. Facial expression, tone of voice, breathing rhythm, posture, attention, emotional energy, all of these communicate information beyond language. That suggests consciousness is not only individual, it may also function collectively. And if collective emotional states shape behavior on a larger scale, then fear, division, and chronic stress may influence society more deeply than we realize. Entire cultures can become conditioned into emotional patterns that narrow perception and reinforce disconnection. People begin reacting automatically instead of responding consciously. Attention becomes fragmented. Reflection disappears. Inner silence becomes rare. Yet silence may be one of the most important conditions for deeper awareness to emerge. Because beneath constant stimulation, there is often a quieter level of perception waiting to be noticed, a deeper intelligence that does not speak through panic or urgency. It speaks through clarity, intuition, emotional coherence, and a strange sense of inner recognition that many people only encounter when they finally slow down long enough to listen. And perhaps that is why the future of consciousness research will not come solely from more advanced technology, but from learning how to understand the living relationship between attention, emotion, biology, and awareness itself. Because the moment we stop treating consciousness as a disconnected mental process and begin recognizing it as an embodied human experience, we may discover that the real experiment has been happening inside us all along, hidden beneath the patterns we were taught never to question. In the first place, because the most powerful conditioning is often invisible to the person living inside it. I've noticed that many people spend their entire lives reacting to internal programs they never consciously chose. They inherit emotional habits from family environments, social systems, cultural pressures, and repeated experiences, then mistake those patterns for their authentic identity. Over time, the repetition becomes so automatic that they no longer question whether their emotional responses truly belong to them. But consciousness changes the moment observation enters the process. The instant we become aware of a pattern without immediately obeying it, something remarkable happens. A small distance appears between stimulus and response. That distance may seem insignificant, yet it represents one of the greatest powers human beings possess. Inside that pause lives the possibility of transformation, because awareness interrupts automation. And automation governs far more of human behavior than most people realize. Think about how often the body reacts before conscious thought catches up. A tone of voice changes our heartbeat. A memory alters our breathing. A stressful thought tightens the muscles instantly. These reactions occur at extraordinary speed because the nervous system constantly predicts what comes next based on previous experience. In many ways, the body is continuously attempting to protect us from emotional pain before it even arrives. The problem is that protective patterns designed for past circumstances can continue shaping present reality long after the original experience has ended. This creates what I believe is one of the central challenges of human consciousness, distinguishing between current reality and emotional memory. Many people are not responding to the moment they are in. They are responding to old emotional imprints projected onto the present. The body remembers fear, rejection, failure, uncertainty, or stress, then interprets new experiences through those stored emotional references. And once that cycle repeats enough times, perception itself becomes distorted. A neutral event feels threatening. A minor setback feels catastrophic. Silence feels uncomfortable. Rest feels unsafe. The nervous system begins living in anticipation instead of presence. I think this is why so many individuals struggle to feel connected to themselves despite external success. Achievement cannot fully compensate for internal fragmentation. A person may master careers, routines, and responsibilities while remaining disconnected from their emotional state entirely. And when emotional disconnection becomes normalized, consciousness narrows into performance instead of authentic experience. But the body keeps sending signals: fatigue, tension, restlessness, emotional numbness, chronic stress. These are not merely inconveniences. They may be communication from deeper systems attempting to restore balance. Yet modern culture often teaches people to override these signals rather than understand them. Productivity becomes more valued than awareness. Constant stimulation replaces reflection. People become skilled at distracting themselves from their internal state while wondering why fulfillment remains elusive. What fascinates me is that moments of genuine healing often begin not through acquiring something new, but through removing interference. When the nervous system becomes calmer, perception changes naturally. People notice subtleties they previously ignored. Creativity returns. Emotional resilience strengthens. Relationships deepen because attention becomes more present. This suggests consciousness expands when internal noise decreases. And internal noise is not only mental chatter, it includes unresolved emotional tension carried within the body. Every unprocessed experience leaves traces in the nervous system. Some become emotional reflexes. Others become unconscious expectations. Over years, these accumulated patterns can shape identity so thoroughly that people forget what it feels like to exist without constant internal pressure. I believe this is why practices involving breath, stillness, focused attention, and emotional awareness appear across so many human traditions throughout history. Regardless of geography or era, people repeatedly discovered that calming the body changes the quality of consciousness itself. The mind becomes clearer, emotional reactivity softens, intuition becomes easier to access, the sense of separation begins to weaken, and modern neuroscience is beginning to reveal possible biological explanations for these effects. The nervous system is deeply responsive to attention and emotional state. Slow, intentional breathing influences heart rhythms and stress responses. Focused awareness can alter neural connectivity over time. Emotional regulation affects immune function, hormonal balance, and perception. The body is not waiting passively for life to happen. It is adapting continuously according to internal interpretation. That realization transforms the meaning of responsibility, not blame, not perfection. Responsibility in the sense of recognizing that our inner state influences the reality we experience. Most people cannot control every external circumstance, but they can gradually influence how their nervous system responds to those circumstances. And that shift changes everything because perception shapes possibility. When fear dominates awareness, options appear limited. When emotional coherence increases, creativity and adaptability expand. The same external world begins looking entirely different through a regulated nervous system. I often think about how much human potential remains hidden beneath chronic emotional overload. Many people are not lacking intelligence or capability. They are exhausted by internal survival patterns operating nonstop beneath conscious awareness. Their energy is consumed managing anxiety, stress, self-doubt, comparison, or emotional suppression. The nervous system becomes so focused on protection that growth feels dangerous. But consciousness seems to evolve through safety, not constant fear. When the body feels secure enough to relax defensive patterns, higher capacities emerge naturally. Compassion becomes easier, insight deepens, learning accelerates, connection feels less threatening. It is almost as though awareness itself functions more clearly when survival mode quiets down. And maybe that changes how we should think about human development entirely. Perhaps intelligence is not merely the accumulation of information. Perhaps wisdom involves learning how to create internal conditions where deeper awareness can emerge consistently. Because knowledge alone does not guarantee transformation. Many people know what would improve their lives, yet remain trapped in familiar emotional cycles. The missing piece is often not information, but integration. The body must experience a new emotional reality repeatedly enough for the nervous system to accept it as safe. That process takes patience. And it also requires honesty, because the patterns shaping consciousness are rarely hidden in dramatic moments alone. They reveal themselves through daily reactions, repeated thoughts, unconscious habits, emotional triggers, and the stories we quietly repeat about who we are. And once we begin observing those patterns carefully, another unsettling realization starts to emerge. The systems surrounding modern life may be influencing human consciousness far more deliberately than most people have ever imagined possible, because attention has become one of the most valuable resources in the modern world, and anything capable of controlling attention inevitably shapes consciousness itself. I don't think most people fully realize how deeply their inner state is affected by the environments they consume every day. Human beings were never designed to process endless streams of stimulation without pause. Yet millions of people wake up each morning and immediately immerse themselves in emotional signals generated by noise, urgency, comparison, conflict, and distraction. Over time, the nervous system adapts to that rhythm until stillness itself begins to feel uncomfortable. And that adaptation comes with consequences. When attention is constantly fragmented, awareness loses depth. The mind becomes reactive instead of reflective. Emotional states shift rapidly without resolution. People begin absorbing external emotions so frequently that they struggle to recognize which feelings genuinely belong to them. Stress becomes normalized because the body no longer remembers what sustained calm feels like. I find it fascinating that many individuals can sense something is wrong internally, even when outwardly everything appears functional. They continue working, communicating, and performing responsibilities, yet beneath the surface there is a persistent feeling of disconnection, a subtle exhaustion, a quiet emptiness that no amount of stimulation seems able to satisfy. I believe part of that emptiness comes from losing contact with direct inner experience. Consciousness requires space, not merely physical space, but psychological space free from constant interruption. Without that space, people rarely hear their own deeper thoughts clearly enough to understand themselves. Instead, they remain trapped in continuous reaction to external input. The nervous system never fully resets. Emotional residue accumulates faster than it can be processed. And eventually, the body begins speaking through symptoms the conscious mind cannot ignore. Difficulty sleeping, chronic tension, emotional numbness, irritability, loss of motivation, anxiety without obvious cause. These experiences are often treated as isolated problems rather than signals pointing toward a larger imbalance between human biology and modern patterns of living. But consciousness does not operate independently from the conditions surrounding it. Environment influences emotional state influences biology, and biology influences perception. Everything is connected through feedback loops most people rarely notice. What concerns me is how easily external systems can shape internal identity when awareness is absent. If people repeatedly hear messages built around fear, inadequacy, urgency, or comparison, the nervous system slowly absorbs those emotional frequencies as normal. Thoughts become conditioned by repetition. Emotional reactions become predictable. Attention narrows toward threat and validation. Over time, individuals may begin living according to emotional programs they never consciously examined. And the more disconnected people become from their own internal awareness, the easier they are to influence. That may sound unsettling, but it also reveals something hopeful. The moment a person becomes conscious of these patterns, influence weakens. Awareness interrupts unconscious conditioning. Once someone recognizes how certain environments affect their emotional state, they can begin choosing differently. They can protect attention more intentionally. They can create moments of silence, reflection, and emotional regulation that restore balance to the nervous system. I think this is why solitude can feel simultaneously uncomfortable and healing. In silence, unresolved emotions rise to the surface because distraction no longer suppresses them. Many people avoid stillness not because silence is empty, but because silence reveals what constant stimulation keeps hidden. Yet beyond that discomfort, something extraordinary often appears: clarity, insight, emotional honesty, a deeper relationship with oneself. And that relationship changes consciousness profoundly, because the quality of awareness depends heavily on the quality of attention we cultivate every day. Attention is not passive observation, it is energy directed toward experience. Whatever repeatedly captures attention gradually shapes emotional reality. If attention remains trapped in fear, outrage, comparison, or overstimulation, consciousness contracts. But when attention becomes intentional, grounded, and emotionally coherent, awareness expands naturally. This may explain why emotionally centered individuals often influence others without forcing anything. Their nervous systems communicate stability. Their presence feels calming because coherence itself affects human interaction. People sense authenticity beyond words. The body recognizes emotional congruence instinctively. And perhaps this is one of the greatest misunderstandings about consciousness. Many assume awakening means escaping ordinary life or reaching some distant intellectual state. But real awareness may involve becoming fully present within everyday experience without being unconsciously controlled by it. To notice thoughts without becoming imprisoned by them. To feel emotion without drowning inside it. To remain connected to inner clarity even while navigating uncertainty. That kind of consciousness is not detached from humanity, it is deeply embodied. I've come to believe that human beings possess far greater adaptive capacity than they were taught to believe. The nervous system can heal, emotional patterns can change, perception can expand. But transformation usually begins slowly, through repeated moments of awareness that seem small at first. A conscious breath before reacting, a moment of silence instead of distraction, a willingness to question inherited assumptions. Tiny shifts repeated consistently begin reorganizing the internal landscape, and the body notices every one of them. Over time, emotional resilience strengthens. Stress recovery improves. Attention deepens. Relationships become more authentic because defensive patterns soften. People stop living entirely through survival reflexes and start responding with intention. That shift may be one of the clearest signs of evolving consciousness. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but increasing freedom from unconscious emotional automation. Because freedom is not only external, some of the deepest forms of freedom emerge internally when awareness is no longer completely controlled by fear, conditioning, or compulsive reaction. And once people begin experiencing that inner stability, they often discover something surprising. The external world may remain uncertain, but their relationship to uncertainty changes completely. I think this is where modern science and ancient insight quietly begin converging again. Both increasingly point toward the understanding that human beings are not passive observers disconnected from reality. We are participants continuously influencing and being influenced through emotion, attention, biology, and relationship. Consciousness appears less like a fixed object hidden somewhere in the brain and more like a living process unfolding through every layer of human experience. And if that is true, then perhaps the greatest mistake we ever made was assuming consciousness could be understood without first understanding the emotional forces shaping the way we perceive reality itself. Because the deeper we investigate the nature of awareness, the more we begin uncovering evidence that human perception may not simply observe the world around us, but actively participate in constructing the experience we call reality itself. And that possibility changes everything we think we know about the relationship between mind, body, and the world around us. I often reflect on how differently life feels depending on the emotional state we carry into a moment. The same conversation can feel threatening or inspiring depending on the condition of the nervous system. The same opportunity can appear impossible or exciting depending on whether the mind is dominated by fear or openness. Even time itself seems to change according to consciousness. Moments of anxiety feel compressed and chaotic, while moments of presence feel spacious and clear. That tells me perception is never neutral. Human beings are constantly interpreting reality through emotional filters shaped by memory, expectation, and belief. And once we understand that, we begin realizing how much power resides in the stories we repeat internally every day. Those stories influence not only thought, but biology. The body responds to imagined futures as though they are already unfolding. Stress hormones rise from anticipated danger. Muscles tighten from remembered conflict. Heart rhythms change according to emotional interpretation alone. In other words, the nervous system often reacts to perception more than objective circumstance. This may explain why two individuals can exist in nearly identical environments while experiencing entirely different realities internally. One sees possibility, another sees limitation. One notices connection, another notices threat. Their consciousness organizes attention differently, and attention shapes emotional experience. I think many people underestimate how profoundly expectation influences the human organism. If someone expects rejection long enough, they may unconsciously behave in ways that reinforce isolation. If someone expects failure, hesitation alters performance before the challenge even begins. On the other hand, when people genuinely believe change is possible, the nervous system becomes more adaptable. Energy increases, creativity expands, persistence strengthens because the body is no longer preparing for defeat in advance. Belief changes physiology before outcomes appear externally. That is not fantasy. It reflects the deep integration between emotion biology and perception. The body constantly listens to the emotional tone of thought. Repeated emotional states become internal instructions, shaping hormones, neural pathways, immune responses, and behavior patterns over time. And perhaps this is why emotionally meaningful experiences can transform people more rapidly than intellectual information alone. A single moment of genuine connection can dissolve years of emotional isolation. One experience of profound safety can soften lifelong defensive patterns. One deeply felt realization can reorganize the direction of an entire life. Because consciousness shifts most powerfully when emotion and awareness align simultaneously. I believe modern culture often encourages the opposite condition. People are flooded with information but deprived of integration. They consume endless advice, opinions, stimulation, and distraction, while rarely being given space to emotionally process what they experience. The result is mental overload combined with emotional disconnection. Many know enormous amounts intellectually while remaining strangers to their own inner state. And without self-awareness, external influence grows stronger. That influence appears everywhere, in the speed of communication, in systems designed to reward outrage and comparison, in environments that constantly stimulate survival instincts because emotionally activated minds are easier to direct. Fear captures attention quickly. Uncertainty keeps the nervous system vigilant. Comparison weakens self-worth. Over time, people can become so externally focused that they lose connection with their own internal guidance entirely. But consciousness begins changing the moment attention turns inward with honesty, not self-judgment, not denial, honest observation. To notice how certain thoughts affect the body, to recognize emotional triggers without immediately acting on them, to become aware of how environments shape energy and perception. These small acts of awareness gradually restore agency. People begin realizing they are not helpless against every emotional impulse passing through the mind. They can influence the quality of attention they cultivate, and attention influences consciousness more than most people imagine. Where attention goes repeatedly, emotional energy follows. What we focus on becomes psychologically amplified. If awareness constantly feeds fear, fear strengthens. If awareness consistently nurtures gratitude, resilience deepens. If attention remains trapped in distraction, clarity weakens. The nervous system adapts to whatever emotional environment is repeated most often. This is why daily practices matter more than dramatic moments. Consciousness is shaped through repetition. Tiny emotional habits practiced consistently become identity over time. A person who repeatedly chooses reflection over reaction slowly changes neural and emotional patterns. Someone who practices calm breathing during stress teaches the body a new response to uncertainty. Gradually, the nervous system learns safety instead of constant defense. And once the body begins feeling safe, awareness expands naturally. People become more intuitive because fear no longer dominates perception. They become more compassionate because emotional survival no longer consumes all their energy. They think more clearly because attention is less fragmented. In many ways, higher consciousness may not involve adding something new to ourselves at all. It may involve removing the layers of conditioning that keep awareness trapped in chronic reactivity. I find it fascinating that some of humanity's greatest insights often emerge during moments of stillness rather than intensity. Clarity appears during quiet walks, deep reflection, meditation, meaningful conversation, or moments of emotional openness. It is as though consciousness reveals deeper intelligence when noise decreases enough for subtle perception to emerge. And perhaps that subtle perception has always been present beneath the surface. Most people simply never learned how to listen to it. They were taught to trust external authority more than internal awareness, to prioritize productivity over presence, to suppress emotion instead of understanding it, to treat the body like a machine rather than an intelligent system communicating continuously through sensation, intuition, and feeling. Yet the body keeps speaking whether we listen or not. Every emotional state leaves biological traces. Every thought influences chemistry. Every environment shapes nervous system regulation. Human consciousness is not isolated from life. It is woven into every interaction we experience. And once people truly understand that, they often begin living differently. They become more intentional about what they consume emotionally, more protective of attention, more aware of the relationship between thought, feeling, and physical health. They stop assuming that stress, distraction, and emotional exhaustion are inevitable conditions of existence, because perhaps they are not inevitable at all. Perhaps many of the states people accept as normal are actually symptoms of disconnection from the deeper intelligence operating within the human organism. And if that deeper intelligence becomes accessible when awareness, emotion, and biology move into coherence together, then the future of consciousness research may ultimately depend less on discovering something outside ourselves and more on rediscovering capacities humanity has slowly forgotten how to access over generations. Capacities that may reveal the human mind has always been far more connected to reality than we were ever taught to believe.
Before we try to understand consciousness, I believe we need to ask a simpler question. What does it actually feel like to be human from the inside? That question matters because most people spend their life studying the outside of experience while remaining disconnected from the mechanism shaping their inner world. We measure behavior, productivity, intelligence, and performance, but consciousness is not only about what we do. It is about how we experience reality, moment by moment. Think of consciousness like the operating system of a smartphone. Most people focus on the apps, work, relationships, goals, stress, routines, but the operating system underneath determines how everything functions. If the operating system becomes overloaded, even the best applications begin malfunctioning. Human consciousness works in a similar way. Your emotional state, beliefs, attention patterns, and nervous system condition form the hidden operating system through which you interpret life. Now let's make this practical. Imagine two people receiving the same short text message. We need to talk. One person immediately feels panic. Another feels curiosity. The words are identical. The difference lies inside the observer. Why? Because consciousness does not passively record reality like a camera. It interprets reality through emotional memory, past experience, belief systems, and biology. This is one of the most important insights emerging from modern understanding of mind-body interaction. Your body is not waiting for life to happen before reacting. It is predicting. Your nervous system constantly asks, am I safe? Am I threatened? What should I prepare for? And it answers these questions not only through logic, but through emotional patterns developed over years. Think of the nervous system like a smoke detector. A healthy smoke detector alerts you when there is real danger. But if the detector becomes overly sensitive, Burnt toast triggers the same alarm as a house fire. Many people live with nervous systems functioning exactly like that. A delayed reply feels like rejection. A mistake feels like failure. Uncertainty feels like catastrophe. The body reacts intensely even when the actual situation may be manageable. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. And understanding conditioning changes how we approach consciousness entirely. Conditioning simply means repeated experiences teaching the body what to expect. If someone grows up around unpredictability, criticism, or chronic stress, the nervous system may learn to expect tension as normal. Years later, even peaceful situations can feel uncomfortable because the body has adapted to survival mode. This explains why positive thinking alone often fails. You cannot simply tell an exhausted nervous system to relax and expect transformation. The body needs experience, repetition, and emotional safety to trust a new reality. That is where modern science and practical wisdom quietly meet. Research increasingly shows that emotional states influence biological processes, stress affects hormones, breathing patterns influence heart rhythms, emotional regulation impacts immune function, focused attention reshapes neural pathways through neuroplasticity. These terms can sound technical, but the core idea is surprisingly simple. Your repeated inner experience changes your body. Imagine walking through a field of tall grass every day using the same path. Eventually, a clear trail forms. The brain operates similarly. Repeated thoughts, emotional reactions, and behaviors create stronger neural pathways. The more frequently a pattern is used, the more automatic it becomes. That means anxiety can become practiced. So can resilience. Self-doubt can become practiced. So can confidence. This realization carries tremendous hope because patterns learned can also be relearned. But change usually begins smaller than people expect. Not through dramatic overnight transformation, through tiny daily experiences that teach the nervous system something new. Here is a simple example you can apply immediately. The next time stress appears, notice your breathing before trying to fix the problem. Noticing matters. Most people skip observation and jump directly into reaction. Instead, pause, take one slow breath, then ask yourself, what is my body preparing for right now? This question builds awareness between stimulus and response. That small pause is powerful because consciousness expands when automatic behavior becomes visible. Another practical exercise involves attention. For one day, notice what repeatedly captures your focus. News, comparison, conflict, pressure, gratitude, curiosity. Your attention functions like sunlight in a garden. Whatever receives consistent attention grows stronger psychologically. If fear receives most of the sunlight, fear expands. If calm reflection receives attention, emotional stability strengthens. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means becoming intentional about the emotional environment you create internally. Now, let's explore a deeper layer. Many people assume consciousness lives only in the brain, but lived human experience suggests something broader. Think about moments when anxiety tightens your stomach, or grief creates physical heaviness in your chest, or excitement fills your body with energy. Emotions are not abstract ideas floating inside the mind. They involve whole body responses. This is why the mind-body connection matters so deeply. Your body participates in consciousness continuously. Ignoring bodily signals often creates disconnection. Listening to them creates information. Fatigue may signal overload. Restlessness may reflect unresolved stress. Persistent tension may indicate the nervous system has forgotten how to shift out of defense mode. These signals are not enemies to suppress. They are communication. One practical habit viewers can experiment with is creating 5 minutes of intentional stillness each day. No phone, no multitasking, no goal except observation. Notice thoughts, notice breathing, notice physical sensations. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is important information. Many people discover they have become so adapted to stimulation that quiet feels unfamiliar. Yet, stillness often reveals emotional patterns hidden beneath distraction. And awareness is the beginning of transformation. Another powerful practice is emotional labeling. When emotions arise, try naming them clearly. Not I'm bad, not something is wrong with me. Instead, I notice frustration, I notice fear, I notice uncertainty. This subtle language shift changes your relationship with experience. You are observing the emotion rather than becoming completely fused with it. That distinction matters enormously in consciousness work. Over time, these practices build emotional flexibility. You become less controlled by automatic reactions, more connected to internal signals, more capable of responding intentionally instead of impulsively. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning hidden inside the exploration of consciousness: not achieving perfection, not escaping human emotions, but learning how to create internal conditions where awareness becomes clearer, biology becomes more regulated, and life is experienced with greater presence, resilience, and authenticity. Because when people begin understanding how belief, emotion, attention, and biology interact, they often discover something unexpected. The greatest laboratory for studying consciousness was never outside of them. It has always been present inside their daily thoughts, relationships, reactions, breathing patterns, emotional habits, and quiet moments of awareness waiting to be noticed.